So today we are doing something different. This is not a normal podcast for you that are watching, listening. I have been in a series on biblical manhood. That's been going for quite a while. But as many of you know, in the midst of all of this, over the last 6 months, I had been running for local school board here in Orange County, California, Placentia Yorba Linda Unified School District. That was a first for me. It's something that I had never stepped into, and I was coerced. I was convinced to jump into the race. I guess I should give a little bit of background on the fact that I did feel called. I felt like it was something that God was calling me into. I felt like it was something that I was equipped to do from a conviction standpoint, though I had no idea of the political landscape that was involved. I definitely had, there we go. I had no idea, just a lot of the dynamic of what went into that, which is why I got Kody involved. If you're watching, you now see his face, or you see his face. So Kody Fairfield, Kody and I, we've been friends for
about a decade,
almost 10 years. Yeah. So 10 years, we initially met through CrossFit gym. He was my coach for a long time there. Over the years, we developed a great friendship. I got to officiate 2 of his weddings to the same person.
Yeah. Make that part clear. It's the same person, 2 weddings.
So once we had to do it in secret during COVID, April of 2020, and then a second time in front of his friends and family, which was pretty incredible to be able to do. So we've just developed that friendship. Maybe you give a little bit of background on you getting involved into the politics side of things.
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, like you said, people also recognize me from like really early podcasts that you have been doing a couple of years ago. I know we did one on like anxiety and depression, a couple things.
I think we even did a politics one before.
We did. Yeah. So if you guys have seen that, I'm back. It's been a minute. But yeah, the politics for me has always been something I've been involved in. Back in high school, I was the conservative libertarian voice. I was on what they used to call the Hawk Talk.
Was there libertarians back then?
There were, but they was kind of lumped into the same group of not Democrats, and that's kind of pretty much what every position is now, is either like conservative, and then there's this wide breadth of range of people inside of that, and then just Democrat. So it's like everybody who's not is just into this larger group.
No, now everybody that's not a Democrat is a Republican.
Yeah, well, they're alt-right is really what it is, which just means anything to the right of. But yeah, so I got involved back then, and it's just something I've always paid attention to. I've really enjoyed debate and conversation and philosophy, and thought that would be a great idea for college. Turns out liberal arts not a great idea for spending money. In terms of whatever you could do. So then it was like, okay, well, maybe I'll do something inside of government. I'll go like business administration and government policy. And so I started about studying that. Then I graduated with a degree in pre-physical therapy and allied health. So
makes sense.
Yeah, it totally follows the path of most resistance, I think is the way I took it. But yeah, I got involved more actively in 2016 with the Libertarian Party, was part of a national campaign, wasn't at all a Trump supporter back in 2016, which is why I got involved. I started with Rand Paul and then kind of jumped around and fell in line with a gentleman named Austin Peterson, was part of his national team helping kind of organize that. We lost on a second ballot to Gary Johnson that year, who would have been the third party representative. And if everybody remembers like the Aleppo incident, or when he didn't know anything about Syria, which would not have happened in our campaign, it was just a dumpster fire, and then you realize that the LP itself was a dumpster fire up until recently, where now they actually have connections and inroads with the Trump campaign, and they've sat down and had dinner and talking about some of the major policies to create more of a libertarian aspect, less libertinism, which is generally what most LPers think libertarian is. Forget the responsibility part. But from there, I stayed in the party for probably another year or two. I was a chairman for the Orange County local chapter, very involved with a bunch of the people who were behind the scenes policy writings. Still have good friends who are connected to the White House. Well, I guess Trump's administration, and there were some people who were still around for the Biden administration. And I expect to see some of them kind of re-elevated again now with the past election. And involved locally had always been kind of like the smaller piece to it. I wanted to jump in. I contemplated running for Congress like 3 or 4 years ago, but when you realize
State Congress?
Actually California represented in the US. It wasn't necessarily a like go out and win it thing. It was more of like get a message out style. But the sitting congressman at that time, who's Ed Royce, had been here for 20 years or probably 20 decades actually. But he had a war chest of like, I don't know, it was somewhere starting at like $40 million because he never runs opposed. And the idea was to go put yourself out there just so you get some name recognition and push a message. But that didn't end up falling into place. And then come to everybody who knows me just knows that that's something I've been involved in and have some experience in and have connections with. And when you started talking about school board, we kind of started having deeper conversations about like structure and those kinds of things. And that kind of led to you asking me to jump in where I could and help, and navigating that life with 2 little girls now, two 2.5-year-old twins, became a little more chaotic than maybe it needed to be. But I think the whole race was probably that level of chaos the whole time. And I always tell people now, kind of reflecting on it, that there are 2 races nationally and 2 types of races locally who have that type of like, what the presidential election felt like is what your school board campaign felt like. The amount of vitriol, the amount of just sheer madness that gets injected into those races, because there are pressures from outside that are influencing local decision making. And I don't even think a lot of people who are in line with those powers realize the larger system at play. I think that they go, well, this is a local election. I'm a teacher in the school, and so because I'm a representative of this, it can't be this big monster Japan to be. But they're ignoring where the funding's coming from. They're ignoring what's happening above them and the people that cut the checks that allow them to run the messaging and the things that they do.
Well, so maybe on that for just a minute. So I think I will probably back up at some point and talk about like entry points, but I think that was one thing that I was so aware of and yet so surprised by was, I mean, I've lived in this community my whole life. I didn't understand just how negative opposition was over ideology in the community, though I knew that obviously we had differences of opinion here. Presidential elections, obviously you see flags and messaging and whatever online. And then over the last couple of years, because our board, so a lot of people don't know, and I don't want to go into the whole backstory, but it has been
find it on the internet,
dumpster fire and chaos in messaging and just attack for the better part of 4 years, really since 2020, that election and then the ensuing. And so I knew that there was a lot of negativity. There was a lot of challenge. There was, just whatever, a lot of opinion. I did not realize how deeply invested people were in to the chaos. And that's where, when it's really hard to say, like, look at the national election and then understand that this is a really, really similar pared down version of that same thing. It's like, no, there's no way. I mean, like, people are talking about, like, at the national election level, like assassinating each other and, whatever. And I'm like, okay, maybe not that, but the amount of hatred that came at me, like instantaneous.
Not even to do with policy.
That was crazy. And so I think like that was one of the first things that I was surprised by was, and it wasn't the attack. It was what are you so deeply invested into that you feel this level of hatred to come at somebody because they value something differently than you? Because effectively, again, I mean, obviously there's a lot of propaganda that's being spread through our school system, particularly in California. There's a lot of money involved. There's a lot of agenda on the line, but I could not grasp quickly enough. And then I did eventually, but I just couldn't grasp quickly enough how invested people were into fighting this war, and not even a war over some huge measure to create better opportunity. It was like, we're going to go to war because I hate you because you're on the other side.
Correct. Yeah, and I think
what did that surprise you first though?
No, honestly, it doesn't. It doesn't at all. And I think it.
Why didn't you tell me that earlier?
Well, I tried to without trying to get you to back out of running. I think because I genuinely believed that you were a person who could get in there and would have a clear mindset and wasn't going to want to play in the gutter.
Yeah.
So there's kind of a twofold scenario when you look at this, right? Like the whole idea of politics, it's supposed to be minds meeting, debate around the idea, and then kind of an outgrowth of, oh, okay, popular support based on argument and things like that. And there's not enough actual debate on the policy. Like the one thing that we talked about when we were starting this up is like, we need to reorganize the way that your bullet points are, right? And the first thing I said to you was, well, we need to make first things first. Well, what are you running for? What's the job of that role? So we need to make sure that students are at the top of that pillar. Everything else that you are suggesting is to support the students.
Yeah.
So we need to make sure that's the flagship. And then you go out and see every other sign out in the street, and it talks nothing about the students.
Right.
There wasn't another sign. It was like, save our schools. And I'm like, that doesn't, who's taking the school? Like, where's that going? Nobody's saying throw the students out in the street. In fact, it's the contrary.
Yep.
The question is how we get there. But the larger miss is that when you boil it down to what motivates people, and you've worked in sales your entire life, and so the first thing you learn in teaching somebody sales is that people buy on emotion.
Yeah.
Well, then you have these messengers who've realized that if I can create the emotion that I need to force the sale, I don't have to argue the minutia. I don't even have to know the minutia.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And that started at a presidential level, and it's trickled down because the same people who are advising presidential campaigns are the people writing policy and strategy downstream.
Yep.
We saw first thing in that there was a political action committee directly tied to the Democrat Party.
Yeah.
Like literally you trace their user handle and their email handle, and it goes directly to the Democrat website. Like if you Googled exactly that thing, it takes you directly there, which tells you there is communication upstream. It may not be like they're sending their top operatives to go have a conversation, but what they're doing is they're passing down messaging saying this is effective, this works.
Yeah.
And the one thing that if you ever want to pass any kind of spending bill, what do you attach to it? Students, teachers, education.
Yep.
Because people always go, yeah, I want to support that. How could I not support those things? And then you look at the state of California, it's like how many bond measures have actually come to fruition that built the things they were supposed to build?
Yeah, none.
Or even in Placentia or Belinda, where we found out that the bond measure that was passed in 2008 and funded in, I think, 2011, basically 4 times the payback on what was borrowed.
Oh, no, 10 times.
Or 10 times, yeah. And there's been no conversation about how that's going to be paid back, because when they run these campaigns about teachers are going to be fired and all these things, well, that's what's actually going to cause those problems.
Yeah.
And not only are teachers going to be fired, property taxes are going to go up, so everybody's pissed.
Okay, so this is something else that I realized really quickly that was a landmine to step on, and yet I'm so frustrated that now I'm not going to stop talking about it. And it's, you cannot challenge a teacher, the teachers. And I think it is incredible. And, whatever, this is my freaking podcast, so I don't even care what people think. I don't have to qualify myself anymore.
No.
But I found myself so often advocating for the kids for better education, for better programs. And anytime I would say anything about the fact that they were not getting it now, I was immediately under fire for saying that the teachers weren't doing a good job.
It's an effective marketing strategy.
Which, by the way,
the teachers aren't doing a good job. It's not a blanket statement.
There are a lot of teachers that are not doing a good job. I mean, if I was to make a generous assumption, fully generous assumption, and I never got into the schools, I never had an opportunity to audit a day, at a school, whatever, I bet a generous assumption is 20% of the teachers are working their asses off every single day for our kids. I would say there's probably 40% that are there doing a decent job of keeping things together. And then the other 20% don't give, or 40% don't give a flying shit about what happens.
Yeah. And it's arguably that the numbers are increasing in the wrong direction. And I mean, the thing for me is like, you take away the teachers. It's because the teachers makes it personal, like, especially if you have somebody in front of you arguing that. The statement is teachers aren't performing. The result is students aren't performing. Why? Well, who is influencing the student performance? Well, then we have to be able to draw back that and go, state of California has consistently declined academic performance. Why? Why is that not investigated enough? And why do people not care enough to sit there and say, okay, we do need to ask questions, and we do need to figure out which teachers are overperforming and pay them for their performance. We need to figure out which teachers have called it in and either get them to retire, or, I mean, it's not like their retirement benefits aren't great.
No. but they have a vested interest in sticking around for as long as possible. Like, again, this is all part of why I believe, and this is a massive undertaking, and it's not something that as a school board member I could even have an impact in.
Right.
But I hate this for the same reason that I hate discussions around immigration, because we clearly have an immigration problem in this country. Nobody wants to fix the root cause of the problem, which is our system of allowing people to come here legally. Legal starts with the L, is broken.
Right.
Nobody wants to fix that. And so the answer is we're either going to let nobody in or we're going to let everybody in.
Yeah.
That's the same thing that's happening at the school level. It's like, if I was running a business and people kept saying to me, like, you're a business person, you can't have the lens like that. I'm like, no, we need to have a lens like that. We're looking at, again, we live in one of the most affluent states in the nation.
Right.
We live in one of the most affluent counties in the most affluent states in the nation. And we are underperforming the mass majority of schools across the country.
Right.
Schools. Why is that? There is only one reason why, and that is a lack of education being delivered by the teachers. If curriculum is consistent, reasonably speaking, though you can argue that Common Core, being in California, is poor and it's creating a lot of its own problems, that's fine, but it's fairly consistent across the country. We don't have the same issues that so many other states across the country do, which is these kids are coming from very poor environments. They struggle to learn. They have significant disability or disadvantage in learning. We don't have that predominantly in our district, though we do have a lot of challenges there. So then it comes back to the next common denominator, which is we have a problem with teachers and we need to do something about it. And I would talk to teachers in private that would say to me, like administrators, by the way, too, that were like, I cannot believe how awful most of the teachers are in our district or some of the teachers are in our district. And again, this is not an attack on teachers, because there are teachers out there that are doing an incredible
It's also not saying that with guardrails that people won't perform better.
Right. But why should they?
They have no incentive. There's zero. And this is the larger question, right? And who was the biggest opponent in your school board race? What entity was the largest opponent?
Teachers union.
Right. What does the teachers union have anything to do with the school board?
Nothing.
They don't control curriculum. Their entire entity is set to exist so that they protect the teachers' benefits, their retirement, and how they negotiate contracts, right?
Well, it's supposed to be.
Correct.
Right.
That's our founding charter. We say these are the ways these things exist. And when teachers make the argument of, we're not the teachers union, well, then why are they the ones paying to fund these conversations on your behalf? All of your advertising. You can't separate that. If you're willing to take the money, you have to take the voice.
Right.
Those two things are inseparable. And if you want to say, okay, well, then they're not representative of the teachers, then create separation so that you guys are also pushing back. Because here's the one thing that frustrates me is that the teachers union, whose job is only to represent teachers, they have no care, they have no incentive to represent students, which is, if you've looked at how academic budgets have been spent, it's why you're seeing anywhere between 80 to 95% of any education budget being spent on administrators and staff and salaries and benefits. And 99% of the time, it's less than 5% that's actually reaching students. And then we sit here and wonder, okay, well, why aren't the students, why do they have to have these crappy desks and these crappy laptops and these crappy, it's because all of the information, all of the funding, the most well-funded education system in the world is consistently underfunded because we're overpromising administrators and staff and we're incentivizing, to your point, to stay on as long as possible. Now, I would argue that I do believe teachers should be some of the most well-paid. But that comes with a responsibility on the back end that says you are going to abide by these things. And then remember that you are a vestibule by which I am granting authority of my children to for a select amount of time. You do not get to intervene in my family because you feel something is more important. I'm paying you for a task that I have curated through the community, through the school board or whatever else. And I said, here are your guardrails of what you should teach my children. It should not be up to the teachers union. It should not be up to the state of California. It should not be up to the federal government to sit there and determine what your kids need to know to be successful. That's called parenting.
Absolutely.
Right? The same concept is why we don't teach how to balance a budget inside the education system. Why don't we teach anything about any type of financial success in the education? We don't teach real health inside of, like, you teach like general biological health, but not even anymore. But you don't teach like, hey, how do I read a nutrition label to make sure I'm not eating junk? What does junk food actually do to my body? Because the people most susceptible to that type of nutritional degradation are going to be people who are coming out of high school who have healthy bodies still And the time to intervene and prevent that is now, so that they understand going forward the rest of their life for the next 60 years, 70 years, that they have an understanding of how to take care of their money and their health. Don't teach any of that.
Yeah.
And if you do, there's second level courses that you have to pay for.
Yeah. And I think, okay, going back just one step before you got there, was one of the things I think that, again, I learned the hard way was not necessarily our school board. I think overall we would both agree, particularly over the last 2 years, we've seen some great things happen that we're all so grateful for. Not just as somebody that was trying to join the board, but as a parent in the district. We've seen better efforts to improve our kids' education than we have in years. Anyway, that being said, I think that overall the role of the school board has lost its way, because from everything I can understand, the sole responsibility of the board was to be a representative for the children and the parents of those children in the community. That's it. And then secondarily, to be a representative of the community as good financial stewards of the taxpayer dollars that were going towards the schools, right? They're not there to represent the teachers.
Right.
They're not there to represent the administrators. They're not there.
In fact, it's counter.
Absolutely.
Which is why the teachers union wants control of the school boards.
Which then is like this. These are some of the other things that were so crazy to me that, again, I learned along the way. I don't think a teacher should ever sit on a school board.
No,
because I think it's a direct conflict of interest.
It's the same thing as I mean, you're seeing in Congress right now where people talk about like the insider trading with stocks.
Yes.
Or conversely, if you even go back to the health route and you see all these regulators go out, they quit and they go work for Kellogg.
Yes.
Right.
Or Pfizer.
Yeah, because they promised things that they can do once they leave.
Yep.
They said, okay, we'll set this in motion and then we're going to go work for you, but I want the kickback for doing that. The president of the teachers union here, why am I blanking on her name?
Linda Mannion.
Yeah. She's not even abiding by the contract that she's on.
No.
And this is proof and parcel that the reason that they want control is so that they can have the control over what they want to do with the taxpayer dollars in order to explicate that. Otherwise, otherwise the teachers union has no incentive to put people on the school board at all.
Right.
I don't have an issue with a general teacher going and running for school board if they're detached from the teachers union. But find me a teacher on a school board who has no affiliation with their teachers union currently sitting.
Right.
Find me, go to Orange Unified School District.
It's a cluster.
Go look at who is behind the recalls over there.
Yeah.
So you want to tell me there's a grassroots movement to put in people who were not union members, and then all of a sudden all this money got dumped in by random mom and pa's all across Orange to recall those same people they just voted in overwhelmingly.
Yeah.
Go look at what's happening out in Chino Valley, right? Temecula had the same thing. Temecula had a conservative board, and all of a sudden they got run over by the union too. There were 3 districts in the whole state of California that had a strong majority, either anti-union or conservative position. All 3 of them are under attack.
Yeah.
In the same exact way, in the same exact language.
Well, the union came right after the election and put out a press release saying how proud they were of the efforts they made to further impact the districts.
Yep.
It's like, this is their whole agenda. And there is no way that you can look at this in any sort of objectivity and not say we have a serious problem on our hands. And set aside all politics, set aside all the money, set aside everything you possibly can. At the end of the day, I just don't understand why more parents, and this is, again, why I got frustrated with myself, because I had a child graduate high school before I stepped into a board meeting.
Yep.
So I'm not saying that I was not part of the problem. And I'm not saying that I'm just going to start attending every single board meeting, partially because I can't just stand the nonsense that's happening in there. But parents are not taking seriously the fact that our kids' livelihoods, not necessarily lives, though that may come, but their livelihoods are absolutely at stake in this. And it's like they don't give a shit.
Yeah.
It's like most parents are just blind to the fact.
Yeah.
And when I started talking to parents about things that were happening in the district, are you aware, even in our own district, which we put a lot of good policies into place to protect a lot of things from happening, parents were appalled when I started sharing stories about the fact that in multiple of our high schools, we've got boys in the girls' bathrooms, and that the administration, instead of supporting and protecting those girls, they are pushing those girls out to inconvenience to use the administrator's bathroom so the boys don't have to. In the neighboring district, in Fullerton Unified School District, they just put freaking tampon vending machines in the elementary school boys' bathrooms. And rarely will an elementary school girl need a tampon.
Right.
Right? In Orange Unified School District, like this one, I cannot wait until this one finally blows up. In Orange Unified School District, they are allowing a boy to go to outdoor education
Right.
in 6th grade and bunk with the girls.
Yep.
I don't know if this one gets me into trouble. I would kill somebody. Like I would literally go John Q on whatever it would take to protect my daughter from that ever happening. And so if you don't think that these things are infringing on your children now and are only going to get worse, you are out of your mind.
Yeah, and the hard part is I tell people this all the time, and I think I actually told one of my teachers who I spoke with at an event that we were at for your school board race, and he's like, well, I was your teacher, and we had a good relationship. And it's like, when I said had, I was like, I thought we still do. Like, this has nothing to do with you personally. And I said to him, look, if you want to play the game of like, we need to be empathetic to the other side, sure, I'm going to grant you that ground. Explain to me how, when a teacher unilaterally thinks that their opinion of my kid is more important than mine, and they take that to CPS, and my kid's gone forever because of AB 1959, which was essentially 1955, excuse me, 1955, that the state can step in and essentially take my child because somebody else reported a mental health condition, whether it was part of the trans issue or anything else. Tell me one case that the parent has won. None. Zero. There's not a single case in the whole state of California since that's been implemented. Now, there's people fighting against it, but it's not stayed. And so these are the things that I worry about. I don't want my girls to be the outlier case.
No.
I don't care if there's a fraction of a chance.
No.
Because I'm not going to put them at... So when you sit there and you ask me, how could you view this way? I was like, because I'm not giving them the 1% chance of being the outlier. I don't want to put my kid or anybody else's kid in a position where something that I willfully could have objected to or stopped, I chose not to because I wanted to placate somebody else's feelings.
Well, so this just happened. Okay, so just last week of our recording, in a neighboring school, Brea Olinda High School, there was an online threat of a shooting.
Mm-hmm.
So some kid, they don't know who yet, I don't think, posted an image online of 2 guns and like, we're coming to get you or something like that. Not the kid with the guns, just an image.
Right.
And tagged the school. So what do you think they did? They shut down the school the next day. Smart thing to do, right? Like, let's
1% chance that it could happen.
Absolutely. And then I started reading that there was other parents from other schools in the district that were concerned, like, are we sure this was going to happen here? Maybe I should hold my kid back. The next day, the police department comes out and says, we don't think the threat was credible. We have no evidence apart from this one social media post. It's safe to go back to school. Hundreds of parents were saying, I don't know, I still don't feel comfortable. I'm like, of course you don't, because there's a fraction of a possibility that somebody is going to come on campus and shoot your child.
Right.
In the same way, there is a fraction of a possibility. And yes, we are going to live with fractions of possibilities in every way that we parent our children.
Can't create security in every aspect.
But also, we can't be ignorant to the fact that if we can control situations or prevent situations from happening, we've got to do something.
At least your own due diligence to do that, right?
Yes.
Well, and then you extrapolate that further, right? And you start looking at, okay, well, why do I feel insecure about when a police department comes out and says, okay, so we don't believe it was credible? Why am I still upset and not comfortable sending kids back? Well, you know this intimately. When was the last time we had a full security audit of Placentia Yorba Linda School?
Never.
And that's part of the conservative majority that's been here for a couple of years.
Right.
That was a big thing that, you were putting on your ballot. It's been so bad in the last, 10 years that their Placentia Yorba Linda Police Department doesn't want to have a presence in certain places because they don't get along with administrators and harassed all the time. Right. And so in the image of, I guess, softening what aggressive positions people want to take on security, we've actually put kids at more risk by virtue signaling that we don't want to have the police department here. We don't want to have these things that make people feel uncomfortable.
Yep.
And we'd rather open the door for actual traumatic impact.
Yep. Absolutely. Well, and this goes multiple ways too, because again, there was an incident on campus earlier this year at one of the high schools. A child student ends up assaulting and beating the crap out of a teacher.
Yep.
I find out later, just by way of asking around, that in the state of California, it is against the law for a teacher to put their hands on a student in a one-to-one situation.
Yep.
Are you out of your freaking mind? Who is like there? The union? Why are you not advocating to have that
for your teacher? Yeah.
That's absurd.
That's actually part of their role. That's part of their expressed position.
So again, it's like safety, it impacts so many things that we don't even think about, because we want to fight more with whether or not we're going to teach critical race theory on campus, or whether we can share a pronoun, or we can make sure that people are accurately representing our pronouns when they address us.
Right.
It's like we've so lost our way. And again, think about it. California, the forefront of all this garbage coming down the pipe. Why do you think there's such a direct correlation to a lack of education?
Right.
They would rather focus on these things than focus on teaching our kids the right thing.
Ask the CTA why they had a big budget for climate change.
That was crazy, right? That was another one I cannot believe. Like $3 million so far, at least last check, was donated to lobby for climate change.
Right.
I'm sure that it's helpful that the planet stays around for another couple million years for your kid, but I just don't think that we need to be spending $3 million on it. Like, that's crazy.
Well, it's not even that. Like, I don't think if you ask them how does this actually direct academic or educational policy, they couldn't show you. It's virtue signaling. And this is the other part that most people miss, is that when we're talking about these positions, you're talking about everything is a dollar sign, right? And when the union gets involved, they're seeing dollar signs. Well, if you go follow the money of the union, whether it's Apple, whether it's CTA, or any other union that is not negotiating against another interest, meaning private unions I have no issue with, because they have to actually negotiate and barter with a business owner or direct people who have representation in the opposite opinion.
Yep.
Public unions are, one, in my opinion, should be illegal net large, because if you're negotiating it's a taxpayer that has no representation. That's called the Revolutionary War. That's literally what we had a war about, was taxation and no representation. And yet we find that to be legal. Not only do we find it to be legal, then they're allowed to take everybody's money who is a teacher who is paying dues. And this just changed recently where they didn't have to opt into that. But for the longest time, they had to pay dues, regardless of whether they felt like they were represented or not. And then they can go lobby and become the largest lobbying firm in the state of California and the United States. And then nobody pays attention to the fact that the heads of these unions are making exorbitant salaries in comparison to the people at the bottom, but they want to yell at other people about how they spend their money. Now, not any larger than that type of imagery. Like, it's interesting to me that just because it's got teachers attached to it, that it doesn't face the same criticism as crony capitalists. Right? Because it's the same conversation. The difference is one is negotiating for your money. The other one is at least creating money.
Yep, absolutely.
The hard part is that there's not. It's starting when you see things like Kody Fairfield and you're seeing now this charter movement. Everybody's like, well, what about public schools? We have to keep funding. If public schools were doing what public schools should be doing, you wouldn't have an uprising of charter schools and the school choice movement. But you know what keeps people in poverty longer than just simply not paying them a living wage? It's the lack of education. They can't even scale up.
Yep. I got in trouble because of Kody Fairfield in a really good way. So he had posted something about defunding the Department of Education, which I'm such a proponent of. I pray to God that Trump actually...
Follow the education statistics since 1979 when the Department of Education was created, and let me know what year it went up.
Yeah, no, it's disgusting. And so I reposted something on X, Twitter, for those of you that aren't keeping up. And I commented saying, not only am I for this movement, but I want to see more charter schools come into into our local community, because we need to create more competition.
Correct.
And it may hurt the public school system in the short term, but it will improve it in the long term, or it will eradicate it completely. And funny enough, I'd already lost the election. I mean, it's not official, but it's official. I got crushed.
And California, we are now 14 days after the election, and we are still counting ballots.
They say until at least December 1st.
And you wonder why people don't trust these.
Right. And so my opponent's supporters screenshot that, posted it in their little private Facebook community that they think nobody else can see into, shitting on me because they said that they dodged a bullet because see what I'm for. And I'm like, no.
Children's education?
I was for that the whole time.
Higher education for the students?
Yeah. Like, I'm not running for school board to keep schools open. I'm running for school board to keep kids educated.
Right.
And to improve that education. Right. And if that requires it to put a hurt on the very institutions that I'm a part of as a representative of the board, or, of the district, I'm down.
Well, you know who doesn't get their hand in the pot if it's a charter school?
Right.
Teachers.
Absolutely. Which is why they're so against it, which should be another reason that makes it so clear. It's no different. Like, we're finally waking up as a society to the fact that, generally speaking, big pharma is horrific for this country. Now, has big pharma helped to cure some very significant diseases? Absolutely. Does the medication that we take that big pharma created help to sustain a lot of people that otherwise could not sustain their lifestyle? Absolutely. But are they profiting off the backs of people being sicker and sicker? Absolutely, right?
Yeah.
Times 10.
Well, and again, that goes into the incentive, right? And when we talk, whether it's the unions or whether it's pharmaceuticals or whether it's big farm, whatever it is, right? You follow the incentive structure. Why do we subsidize things like high fructose corn syrup? Well, simply because we put a tariff on our own sugar imports.
Yep.
So we did that to ourselves to incentivize. Why? Because the United States is one of the largest producers of corn. So if I can take corn and I can sell it everywhere else and I can make that cheap and affordable, also it's addictive, also it makes people want more. Okay, great. I've just subsidized my own economy by creating a sickness and health problem downstream that I don't care about, because now I can generate all this cash. And when you're talking about dollars over peanuts, and you think about how people look at their health metrics, people don't go, oh, I'm not going to smoke this cigarette right now because 50 years from now I might get cancer.
Right.
They're like, I'm going to smoke the cigarette right now because that's what I want to do. And I don't see there's no short-term slap on the wrist to say I shouldn't do that.
Yep.
Most people are short-term operators. Same thing when you're looking at school boards.
Yep.
I want the short term to be stable. Most people in this election, if I had to bet, voted for what they felt would create stability.
Yes.
Right or wrong in terms of what they support, they wanted stability. And this is, if I had to give the biggest critique to the current board majority, who has their last, I think, board meeting today, was that they never went to create a form of stability in the community. I do think they did a lot of great work. I think Leandra has done some amazing things in terms of accomplishments for the school district, but there wasn't a sense that she brought everybody together and unified the message. And I think one of the things that I talked about being the biggest piece was some type of PR for the things that they're accomplishing, they're choosing, or they're accomplishing, and that they're championing, so that the community actually knows about it in a way that is presented palatably to everybody. Because what happens when we don't do that is that you leave it up to the opponent to define you. Yeah. And I think that's what's consistently happened here. And
I think that, we started to finally see that happen when our new superintendent, Dr. Chernus, came in, because now we had started to see in the last 6 months more consistent communication, more transparency of communication. And so that was helpful. But yeah, I mean, it was way behind the curve. I mean, a strategist, and right now in hindsight, looking at how I would have approached this from a business perspective, that would have been one of the first things I did, is I would have assessed the situation to understand where the greatest threats to success were going to be. And one of those was going to be around the narrative. Clearly it was negative, and everybody knew that. But why? That was what was not completely clear. And I think that even the previous 2 years in which there was not a conservative board majority, and they still were having some successes because we had a waffle, and one of the other trustees that was supportive for a little while, like, they should have been messaging the success of those programs all along, because the community didn't understand. Like, most people weren't aware of the fact that our test scores have been dropping for 6 years until
test scores, attendance.
Yes. I didn't know that. Nobody knew that. And of course, no current leader, business or board, whatever, is going to want to share negative metrics. But we have to, if you're representing the people, you have a responsibility to communicate to them the true state of what's going on.
And on that point, like, that's the part that frustrates me the most. And I'm seeing this all over the place. And by no means do I think I'm the world's greatest leader. But what I would tell you is that anytime I identify a problem, I'm being transparent with either the solution or the need for help to bring somebody in to solve that problem. And I think this is where the biggest miss is. You can be the most phenomenal teacher and get on a school board and go, I have no idea how a budget operates, because you've never had to operate a budget in that scale. You can be the world's best business leader and go, I don't know how to connect to the community on a level like this, even though I have the skill set to do this job. Like, I need to understand how to do these things, right? So there's holes on both sides. But to your point, if you've identified a problem and you're a leader and you're in charge of executive decision making, and you're saying, okay, we've lost X amount of students, every year there should be, hey, here are the negatives, here's the solution, right? And if this doesn't work, we're going to pivot, we're going to come with something new. To the conservative board's credit, they did that. They had success. They increased enrollment. They increased the availability of certain programs that students of all socioeconomic ranges could access. But what they weren't able to do is then show that in hindsight to say, here's where we were, here's where we are, here's why these two close the gap on, Project A. And it, again, left it to this online piranha tank to then tear up the good news and find something that they can. It's like looking through data of any type of research study. If you look at data long enough, you're going to find a way to back your priors.
Absolutely.
Doesn't make a difference whether it actually supports what you think or it defeats what you think. But you can find language in there that can twist it to make it sound like it came out with the results you want, which is why you have these larger corporations who pay for their own studies, because they're just manipulate the data, right? And that's kind of what happened there, was that in the face of the success of the conservative board, they weren't controlling the narrative on their own language. And so it left it for the piranhas to do, and they tear it up, spit it out, and then like, chaos. All they do is they run out in the street and scream chaos.
Well, and, again, this was something that the union was able to do so well. So I found this out 2 days after I lost, or 2 days after the election, and it was clear. A teacher messages me privately, who I never had talked to before, on social media, and said, I'm so sorry that you lost. We really wanted to see you win. I'm at one of the local elementary schools. I just want you to know something that happened. And she goes on to tell me that a union representative met with every single school in the district and required them to handwrite 100 letters to people in the community, signed by an anonymous teacher. And in there, they had a few different lines that they could choose from. And one of those lines was either naming myself or Leandra, our current board president, and the fact that we were an extremist. And so they were taking, right or wrong,
Marching orders.
They had a marketing plan in place, and they executed well. Now, on the flip side, we had multiple administrators that had left the district. A couple of those, one was pushed out for sure, I know of. That was one principal. Another one was given a gift and didn't take it, threw up the middle finger, and went and told a different story. Now, I understand as an employer, you are not able to divulge the information as to why somebody was moved along or let go, right? That doesn't mean that you can't help to influence that narrative with other people that are supportive of you, that are in the know, that can also share the truth behind what happened. Because in those situations, like, that was one thing that was used so much against us, was, like the conservative side was, you pushed out all these people, It was, oh, no, we didn't. Oh, no, we didn't. But you could not speak to the truth of what happened. Whereas if you would have been able to communicate, well, that principal had multiple write-ups of offenses, and they were told. And finally, they had to be moved along.
Well, and that uncovers, again, the need for PR wing to craft messages. Anytime there's an action by the board, there should be a PR message sent out. But I think the next level of that's missing, and really this is the gripe that I have, not just with the school board races or anything like that. It's like, locally, I don't feel like there's organization and sharing of data to help support like-minded candidates in various areas across whatever area that they should be running for, right? Like, when you look at the teachers union, really what it is a political action committee. They're supporting their policy wherever they feel like they can create influence, and if they see a door to create influence where they're allowed to do it, that's what they're going to do. That's what they're built to do. More than anything else, that's what they're built to do. There's nothing like that opposes them. There are splintered organizations, some may be as big or some may be bigger, but they're not working in tandem together across the streams like the teachers unions do, all the way up from the federal level, when Randy Whitegarden, all the way down to local levels like APLE. A lot of teachers don't even know that network themselves, because they just do their job, and they don't think about what's going on behind them, and they don't understand the trail of funds in the same way that execution that this teacher brought up, where she said, hey, write 100 handwritten letters. that's a barking order. That's a marching order to go out and execute on the CTA. Well, the only reason, if you disagreed with that position, that you would do it is if they have something over you that you require for whatever kind of sustenance you need on the back end, right?
Which they threaten that they do.
Of course. Well, and I had, when this race started, I told you I have a good friend who is he's a site manager, which means that his job is to go to those meetings and listen in. And he told me the same thing. He said that they are paying teachers to exit the classroom to go walk school board campaigns not in their school board or their school district.
Yep.
And then paying a substitute to come teach the teachers. Well, tell me how that benefits kids. Tell me how the day out of the classroom watching a video that isn't curricula is benefiting those students because they're out marching for the teachers union.
Yeah.
Right. And then I said, okay, well, can you present me any evidence? He goes, oh, they don't let us take flyers and they don't let us write anything down. We're not allowed to take pictures. They also don't email us on our school district emails. And I said, that's odd. Why did they do that? And he said, oh, well, because of the right to recall those emails as public information.
Yep.
So you could do a PRA on that, and then the court system will legally say, okay, the public has interest in this situation, so please try to provide over those emails. Well, they're not stupid enough to put it in there, so they email personal email accounts.
Yep.
And they basically don't let this information get disseminated because they knew that if it was public, there'd be an outcry against it.
Yeah.
The hard part is every time I ask somebody to come forward, I can't do it. I can't risk my family. I can't risk my livelihood. I can't risk my job. And I get it. I 100% get it. But at some point, you have to push hard enough to make noise.
Yep.
And if you don't, there's going to be that part of your soul that constantly gets eaten away until you either become part of the machine or you're just dead to whatever it's doing and you just go along to get along. And this is coming to fruition in places right now. Kody Angeles and the Manhattan Institute are doing this thing where they're reporting on not just post-election issues, but like any school board situation they can find that needs public attention.
Yep.
They're putting it out there. So the biggest one that I shared with you the other day was out of Washington, and it was a school district that just had 2 teachers arrested for sexual assault on multiple children in, I believe it was middle school ages. Well, people showed up to the school board meeting, and there were students, past students, current students, past parents. Turns out this has been going on for 6 years. The school board never reported it to the police. They knew about these incidents. They had been reported all the way up the chain to the principals, never reported to the police department for 6 years. So this was allowed to continue going on for 6 years. When the school board finally brought it to the police department claims that never happened, by the way, but they said, oh, we brought it to the police department's attention, and they basically said, keep the teacher in the classroom until we come to a determination. Police department came out and said, that never happened. We would never have advised you to leave those 2 teachers in their place while we go in through this investigation. There is no investigation because the moment we investigated, they were arrested. And so that leads to this larger question of, okay, well, if there's these confounding influences on these administrators, teachers union, right? The social stigma of being the teacher or the principal who was anti-LGBT or whatever, or didn't want to call somebody out and be wrong, or didn't want to be socially ostracized because the larger movement, they were contra to the larger movement of what they're involved in. And now you have kids paying the price.
Yep. Yeah. No, absolutely.
Because you advocated your role as a leader to do the things that were right when it was hard to do it. It's never hard to do it when you have concrete 100% factual proof, but normally that requires a victim.
Yeah. So, okay. This is such a great place to start to land with, because I think this is my biggest takeaway of them all. I'm going to connect a couple of dots here.
Good, because I'm like word vomit.
No, it's good. So back to Orange Unified School District. Again, here it's a neighboring school district. When I found out what happened, I said that the parents needed to stand up, risk their kids not going to camp and having that camp shut down to prove a point. Yep. The parents' reaction was, we're going to get exceptions for our own daughter so they're not in that cabin so they can still go to camp. And I hate to say this because I totally empathize with what they're doing.
Yeah.
They're part of the problem.
They're at least not part of the solution.
No, they're part of the problem. I'd like, we can disagree here, but you said something earlier that I think is the most important thing of this all. And this supersedes everything, or this spans across any idea, any group, anything. We need to get people that are willing to stand up and do something about it. This was Scott I want to say Peterson, but then I just think of like the murderer. But the guy in Pennsylvania that moved to Pennsylvania that went to Pressler, Scott Pressler, moves to Pennsylvania to start registering voters on behalf of Trump. They turn Pennsylvania red and all these counties red that had not been before, right? Somebody that was willing to put his money where his mouth is. And then what's so incredible, by the way, you should follow that story. People should follow that story because the dude is like driving the wheels off his car.
Literally.
Yeah,
literally.
And when he had no tires and was asking people, no, he didn't even ask. He was mentioning that he was trying to figure out some money because he wasn't making any money from this. The community rallied around him and bought him a new SUV.
Right.
Without knowing at all. Like it ends up blessing him a year later.
Yeah.
Right. Whatever. But somebody willing to stand up. I heard Joe Rogan just recently. He said that when he finally came out in support of Trump, obviously the day before the election, that he said he had so many celebrities reach out to him and thank him because they could not do it because it was going to risk their career, but he could. Well, he's so detached. He's like, I don't give a shit what you.
His whole thing is the middle finger anyway.
Yeah, you can't cancel me. But these are examples that we need to take. And so back to our local communities, like you and I, most of us will never have an impact on a national campaign. Scott Pressler did, but
Scott Pressler is the most unique scenario I have ever. Like he took over a state, and now he's threatening people
to another.
Or doing He's like, okay, I'm moving to New Jersey. We're gonna go conquer New Jersey,
which I love it. But like, where are
leaders,
the people, the parents that have a strong conservative? I'll say this out loud now. Where are the Christian families that are looking at what's happening in the world, that are looking at what's happening in their own communities, that are looking at what's happening in their own kids?
Where the Christian churches?
Yeah. I have a lot of bad words.
I know. I'm
not going to say it, but it's like, it's disgusting to me. And dude, I got my ass kicked. Like I got beat so bad. I mean,
did you lose personal friends?
Yeah. One of my closest friends has disowned me now because of my views, which is so bullshit. It's on him, not me.
Well, it's also not a change in your views have been your views
forever. It cost me the last 6 months, time, effort, energy.
Before we expand on that, can I ask you one question?
Yeah.
Regarding that, are your views now? Well, was he friends with you when you were in your late teens, early 20s?
Yes, and that's what's worse. I was an asshole.
Yeah.
And got into so much trouble.
But your views then were not a problem for him.
Right. And granted, we've grown up, we've matured, things change. But it's just like, but again, I don't want to martyr myself.
No. I'm just, I like to bring that point up though, because it does highlight the personal side. The reason you don't get people in a role like that to step up is because they don't want to go through that. They don't want to lose those friends, and they don't want to, but one of the big things that I am big on in my own personal circle, and I tell everybody who cares to listen to me for any form of mentorship, it's what I tell my coaching staff at the gym. It's what I tell, it doesn't matter whether you align with me politically or not. But the one thing I tell people more than anything else is, one, you're controlling only your decision. So if you make a decision to do X, that is your decision to do this, especially in relationships. If you're the one, you can't sit there and say, oh, well, then you should just leave because I'm not good for you.
Right.
Make somebody else's decision. The other side of that is you need to be able to decide on when the time to stand up for something you don't support makes a difference. Because
but okay. The one thing I'm scared about there is I think most people will say, I don't think I can make a difference. Or they're going to say, I don't think it's worth it. Like, look at in the short term, right now in the moment, it was not worth it.
Yep. So curate your circles.
And so like, I don't know what's going to happen. And on one hand, I absolutely regret it because of all the distraction, the money that it cost me, and not like I run my own business. I gave up so much time. If I did anything else. By the way, I still have a bill due that I didn't raise enough money for. I'm pissed off that I have to write that last check. Like there's a lot of things that I gave up, and I don't know how this is going to benefit me, but I know one thing is for certain, that I can look my kids in the face and say that I stood up when nobody else would.
That's where it's going to benefit.
And that is what, but people sometimes will say to me, I had the kindest client to me the other day. He says, you know what? He goes, we were talking about this, like me losing. And he says, I don't know many people that are as boldly courageous to stand up for your faith in the public square the way that you are. And I'm like, I'm so grateful that someone will say that about me. I want to see that 100 times over.
Yeah.
Because me by myself, I will never unravel the California Teachers Association or anything else for that matter. But with 10 people, with 20 people,
Yeah.
I just want to be a part of it.
Well, I mean, here's the other side of that too. It's like, I'm not even calling for the abolition of the CTA. I'm just calling for information. Well, no,
yes, no, I agree.
Right? Like, you need to get people in there who take it back to what it's supposed to do.
Yeah.
Keep it out of the things it's not supposed to. I have zero issue with a union on its face for its founding mission and principles. If you just look at it as a blanket statement and say, okay, what did unions get created for? I'm like, sure. Like, I have no issue with some creating a negotiating body against somebody whose interest is not your own.
Yeah.
No,
I mean, especially like,
that's called debate.
Especially when it comes
to an election.
Yeah. And when it comes to the legal protection that at face value that it provides to teachers when they get put into sticky situations, I'm firmly for. So yes, you're right.
But what we get into is, will it reform itself, or does it need outside pressure to reform itself? Well, it's not going to reform itself if nobody inside the union is doing anything. Like Sean O'Malley, right? I think it's his name. Sean, he's the union rep that actually spoke at the RNC this year. Sean,
I know who you're talking about.
Anyway, that's the most courageous I've ever seen the union.
Yes.
And you know what? He actually spoke up when it was a time to speak up, because it turns out his body behind him was actually supporting the things he was saying.
Yep, absolutely.
And then you see all these other subchapters who are ignoring their voting base come out and do the opposite of what their people are saying.
Yep.
So there is this movement within the union at this point that I think it's starting to bubble over, where you're going to start to see some changes. But the question is, are they going to do what the DNC did, which is just subtract and replace people in with no questions to ask? You don't really get a say, and they're just going to put people in there to continue marching orders? Or are you going to have somebody like Sean who steps up and at a national level goes up publicly and says, hey, look, this isn't what my people are saying anymore?
Well, yeah. And, because
that's the leadership that's missing.
Don't take on the union. Be a freaking parent that when your kid comes home complaining because a teacher's doing a bad job, that you show up at the school.
Yeah.
Right now we probably have half a dozen to a dozen parents that regularly will go reach out to the school. We'll sit down with them. If it was 100, 200, could you imagine the difference that could be made?
Yeah.
Like, it's just so easy, especially in a relatively conflict-free community like ours, to just sit back and let it ride itself out. I've talked to so many parents that are like, oh yeah, that doesn't fly with me.
Yeah.
Why, are you doing anything about it? No. Well, you don't even have, I wish more people would go to the board meetings. You don't have to.
Mm-mm.
Just get involved and stand for something. Again, and
it could literally be a letter to the school board saying, here are the things I support, here are the things I don't.
Absolutely.
You could just have a volume of information coming into the school board. But again, this comes down to, I think, as we become a more atomistic society, in the sense that, it's become the short-term me over the long-term community thought process. And it's funny because if you hear me talk, and with, especially when it comes to individual liberty and the availability to have the space to do what you want to do, so long as you're not hurting other people, it sounds counterintuitive. But what I can also tell you is that people are communal. By nature, we are communal. We need community. So the question is, why, when we have created this more atomistic society, do we see increased depression? Do we see increased mental instability? Do we see increased pharmaceutical dependency? Do we see increased obesity? Do we see increased or decreased nutritional habits? Do we see decreased financial habits? You've broken the community bonds that kept people together, that created unity and created the understanding that we're all playing the same game.
Yep.
Right? And when you basically said there is no game anymore, we're all just acting in our own interest. Well, now you have competing voices screaming at each other.
Yep.
And then they end up taking whatever ideology can replace that faith that they had in these community institutions, which could be politics. And I think for the left, you see what it is the right typically, on average, if you ask them, they would say, yeah, my neighbor's wrong. They're allowed to be wrong, but I don't think they're evil. Conflate or contrast that with, if you ask a lot of people on the left and they say it openly, if they said, no, my neighbor is evil because they support those things, or they're not moral because they support those things. And that's a large contrast that doesn't get easily built back together unless you have, and this is what's kind of made this Trump election to me so impactful, unless you have people willing to cross that party line and say, I don't care if we only agree on the 15%, because the 15% we agree on are foundational to the rest of the 85 we want to fight over. And really, to me, that's what this election cycle was. And until that happens in local communities, you're going to continue to have these driving forces that come in. There's no chaos in this community in Placentia Yorba Linda, there's no chaos for that teachers union.
Yeah.
There's none.
Yeah.
There's no chaos because then it's just parents having a conversation about their kids.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because there's no money. There's no money going into that to,
Yeah.
to support these propaganda signs that are coming up. Like, there's no money going into guerrilla campaigns made with cardboard, and yet those cardboard signs, somebody left the directions on about where they were supposed to be placed.
So many dumb things. Well, I think that I'll land it this way, because I just realized we could be here forever too. But
to be continued.
I think that I've never been more hopeful, at least not since I saw somebody say this recently online, and I agree, since the day after 9/11.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of unity.
I think and that's not like, yeah, I mean, it's no surprise that I voted for Trump, and I'm excited for him to be in office. But to see the people rally together against the institution, we have not seen ever in our lifetime, and not the unity.
Biggest cultural shift you're seeing right now is that it's open. It's publicly acceptable now to be okay with this administration.
It's crazy.
But go look at all the sports celebrations and what dances they're doing.
Crazy. But look at it's because, I mean, in many ways, in some that I don't like and I don't agree with, but they have collaborated together by reaching across the line. I mean, there was a picture, recently, and it was Trump, Tulsi, Elon, and RFK, and it was like these four people used to be Democrats, and in many ways they still are, right? Just with the
they even trolled their own thing. They had a picture. They were on Trump's Air Force One, and they were sitting there, and they had ordered McDonald's.
I loved it,
and they posted a thing and just said starting tomorrow.
Yeah,
starts tomorrow. I was like, that's great though, because it shows that you're human, and like I'm not gonna not be caught eating these things, but what I'm saying is this shouldn't be your diet.
Yes.
Right. But your ability to be human in that and like be relational and like, because this is what you and I do when we see something funny. I send you a meme and then we laugh about it. And then that was our texting for the day. Right. Like those are community bonds that are kind of showing their self. And I don't, to your point, I think I am optimistic, and I'm not just optimistic with like the larger politics, because ultimately 99% of the time what happens at the presidential level doesn't actually affect you downstream. Maybe tax policy, maybe unilateral executive orders that aren't technically legal that get signed, and then those trickle down.
Right.
But that's, again, backbone of Congress not really standing up for their authority. But
even California, I mean, we saw a shift. Mm-hmm. And again, this, I mean, for me, this is about conservative versus progressive ideology. But we saw a good shift back. Mm-hmm. We have seen California as a whole push back on the destruction of our own state.
Yep.
We're starting to see more people speak out about that. But my hope is that people now see this as their lane of opportunity to raise their hand and do something about it. Mm-hmm. Because I get it. It was scary. It still is, but it was scary. It was against the grain. You were putting your professional life at risk, your personal life at risk, all these things at risk, but ride the wave.
Yep.
Take this as the green light to say, you know what? I can use my voice. I can do something. And even for me, I've said this to you, like, I do not foresee another day that I run for political office of any kind, but I've now been exposed to too much to let this go.
Yeah.
And I don't know what that looks like. Maybe I'm going to become the largest advocate for charter schools in our community. Or maybe
boy, do I have a project.
No, stay away. Or it could just be just using a platform, to build relationships and share information. But we have to continue to ride this wave. Yeah. And I feel like if we get through the next 4 years without making an impact in our local community as the result of what's been started already, I believe we've missed probably the opportunity of our lifetime from a political perspective.
Yeah, I mean,
cultural perspective too.
Cultural, politically, for sure. But I think all of that is dependent on timing, right? Like, I think the way that you set that premise is it's timing dependent. It says right now or opportunity is gone. And I think I would expand that challenge further. And this is whether you agree with me or not. I would say that, like, when you have an opportunity to create influence.
Yeah.
Right? That's what builds connections through your society. And you're not building influence because you think you know better than somebody else. You're building influence because maybe you have a thought process that's different than somebody else. And if you never share that, nobody else gets to benefit off of what you know. The biggest shift in my life, obviously coming with my girls, and I had this epiphany when I woke up, I think they were like 2 or 3 months old, and I was like, everybody chases this idea of generational impact. Like, I want to leave my mark. I want to do X, Y, and Z. It's as simple as raising your kids.
Yeah.
You will not change the world any more than by who those people become. And if they become people who look at you and say, that's the moral figure that I want to place my precipice on and grow my family on and have their kids go further and on and on and on, you created more generational impact than you could have by running a multi-million-dollar business, by becoming some president for 4 years, because generationally now, as that splinters out, right, and they have kids and those kids have kids and those kids have kids, that if you created some kind of familial link that pushes what your family means publicly, I think that that's the biggest change. All of that comes down to, in order to have an opinion and create influence, you have to have an identity. You have to know what you stand for. You have to know what you believe, and you have to know why. It can't just simply be, I like this, this sounds good for me, and that's why I like it. It has to be a foundational root of, my family does this, and this is what it means to be a Miller. This is what it means to be a Fairfield. This is what it means to be whatever your family lineage is. If you don't have that connection, your kids are going to be more vulnerable from it. Your family's going to be more vulnerable from it. Your marriage is going to be more vulnerable from it. Your community, everything outwardly, because there's no image. It's always looking for belonging.
Well, because we talked about that recently, I actually wrote a article that will be published soon on legacy. And I think it's so important. We have an incredible opportunity, and this is biblical. We have an incredible opportunity to make the world better than when we when we leave it. Or than when we found it. And I just think that that's something that we need to do. Well, been fun, as always. I hope you guys liked this. This was talk about a one-off. Some of the stuff's not going to be relevant to you because we're saying names and talking about things that you don't give a crap about because you don't live here. But I hope you take from this something that I think is really, really important. And it was the last thing I said is you have an opportunity to change the world. That could be in your family, and that's it. Incredible opportunity, the number one responsibility you have outside of you honoring God. Or you may be a future president of the United States. And I just think that people need to take that to heart more often. So like, share, subscribe, do whatever you want. I don't really care today. This was just an opportunity to share. So
I think it'd be good to come back and do another one about next steps, about what we plan on doing after this. And like, once we have that delineated out, we'll come and share some news about where we think.
You did this on camera, so that way.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I'm putting a call to action for you. Only because you mentioned, like, I don't know what's next, but I think we should define what's next. Because clearly, I think you're feeling called to something. I've already told my wife that I'm feeling called to something. She's like, you're not running for anything because of what she saw you go through. But at the same time, I think there's ways to create influence and continue telling the story and show people, because I think it's important that if we're going to harp on seize the moment, take that action, become an identity, that we share kind of what we're thinking and where it's going and who else may be involved and where we think that we could play a bigger impact.
Take it into consideration.
Okay.
Thank you.